coming back on the air.
Johnny.
You're still afraid.
I'm not afraid.
There wasn't a sign of life and death.
We've got to do something.
Why don't you just keep calm?
You're telling us we gotta risk our lives just because somebody might need help.
Yeah, something like that.
They dragged you out there and beat those things.
Go ahead.
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.
Haven't you had enough?
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Good evening. So now what are we doing? Oh yeah, okay, so we're here for NIGHTCast, the official Night of the Living Dead podcast. And I'm Jim, and before I bring our guest on, just wanted to talk briefly about the work of our previous show's guest, Daniel Kraus. I picked up a copy of his book, co-written with George Romero, which is Pay the Piper. And I was unaware of it, but we had started talking about it on the last show. And I was really interested in it because the premise is very similar to an episode of the Kolchak the Night Stalker TV series called The Spanish Moss Murders. So it takes place in Cajun territory, and it's a kind of the premise is a kind of swampland boogeyman, which is really interesting, very similar to the Kolchak episode, which is one of my favorites. So I recommend everybody pick it up. This is a good change of pace coming from the late George Romero as well as from Daniel, and it's very interesting. So be interesting to see if it eventually becomes a some kind of a movie or TV program or something like that. But I'm looking forward to getting into it. But anyway, you can get that on Amazon, and I'm sure at most bookstores like Barnes and Noble. But tonight we're here to talk to another author, and that is Geoff Turner. He is the author of Night of the Living Tapes, as well as coming to a theater near you, 2 books on the distribution and the advertising of Night of the Living Dead. So welcome, Geoff.
Hi, everybody.
Good to see you.
How's it going?
And good. Geoff's books are available at his website as well as on Amazon, which is Death Cult Press. And he's got some other Night of the Living Dead items there as well. So Geoff, you're a official Night of the Living Dead Image 10 authorized author.
Yep.
What could you tell us about that? How difficult was it to become a Night of the Living Dead author endorsed by Image 10?
Honestly, it was not difficult at all. I reached out to Russ, and actually it was 4 years ago today, we all had a phone conversation about the first book. So
it was today?
Yeah, it was 4 years ago today.
Wow. Okay. So there's a cool anniversary. So yeah, look, I just kind of smart alecky threw that out there, but I mean, that's the point, is that it's not hard to do something authorized where Image 10 can help promote it and be involved in it. And quite frankly, so your first book that we're talking about, the book that you went to Russ with, and the idea you went to Russ with, and then talk to Gary and myself, is Night of the Living Tapes. And what we did with that, well, tell us how you had the idea, for this book. I mean, is this is your area of passion with Night of the Living Dead, is the
Yeah, so
distribution and home video?
I first saw the movie on VHS, and I started collecting the tapes when I figured out there were more than one. I'd search eBay and would see different cover art and stuff, and just kind of thought to myself, this is interesting how many different copies there are out there. I wonder how many there actually are. So I just kept looking and looking, and eventually decided there's enough here that I could probably write a book about this. So I started working on that in November 2016, and then it was finished in January 2021. So I spent a little over 4 years on the book, and cataloged 257 variant releases of the movie on dead formats up to DVD, but not including DVD. And I still find more all the time. Like as of right now, I'm up to 298. So they're still popping up.
And you have in addition to the book again, which is pictured here, you also have a checklist now.
Yeah.
Like as a companion volume. Now, is that something that you update with these new?
It is. The most recent version
new
that I updated
finds.
to that had 284 copies in it. So I found more since the last time that was printed. It's just, I don't want to print the book like every 6 months because I don't want to bombard people with, get the new version, get the new version. There's 5 more copies in here, So it's something to try to keep. Like every time I find a substantial amount of new tapes, it's like, hey, there's a lot more out here than we originally thought. So we're going to add them to the list so that people can seek them out.
So I jumped ahead a little bit, going back to you first saw Night of the Living Dead on VHS, not on like
Yes.
broadcast TV or cable. So what version was that? And was it something that you rented, or did you buy it, or
No, it was my
what's the
11th
story behind it?
birthday. I spent my money on the 2-tape 25th anniversary
Yes.
set. So, and this one was it was intriguing to me because it had bonus material, and you never saw that with videotapes or movies at that time. And the bonus
Now
material was
that's
really what they were selling. It was the roundtable interview that they did
right.
with George and Carl and everybody. And
Now
they
if
just
I
kind of
remember
included the movie with that one.
right, if I remember that correctly, so that's the Thomas Brown documentary. It
Yeah.
was originally put out by Tempe Video, but the
Mhm.
version that you have there is a shorter version
Yeah, it's a
that
substantially
was put
shorter
out by
version.
another company. Yeah, and then it was
Yeah, it was
packaged together
Scimitar.
with the film.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. So that's the Scimitar version.
Yep.
But so that would have been roughly around what, it was about
Um,
1980
94 was when
or
I picked it
90,
up. So it had been
94.
out
Right.
for a little while at that point.
Yeah. Okay. So so you get that version. Like you said, you're 11, and then what got you kind of motivated to find that there was? Well, what were the other versions that kind of like caught your attention? That there was more versions of this film.
It was just like searching for memorabilia, and it quickly became my favorite movie. So I wanted posters, anything I could get my hands on. And when you search for that stuff, you search everything, and you get hundreds or thousands of results. And the VHS tapes pop up, and it's like, I already had this on VHS, but there's a different VHS, and there's
Right.
another VHS, and then there's another VHS. Then there's VHS
There
from all
really
over the
wasn't.
world.
Right. There
And
really
it's like,
wasn't that situation for any other film.
right. And it
You're
was
a
exciting to me as a
youngster in the.
collector.
Yeah. Cool. So then jump ahead, so around to 2016,
Mhm.
roughly 18, 20 years later, um, you decide that there's enough material here to, well,
Yeah.
was it the case of that nobody else had really collected this information and you wanted
Yeah, that's the thing. There
to,
were a few other
yeah,
people that I knew of that collected as seriously as I did, and some more seriously than me. Um, and we just kind of got to talking, and we're like, somebody should write a book about this because there's so many of them out there, and it's fascinating to see all the different artwork and all these like fly by night companies that just put the movie out, you know, because they could or because they thought they
right.
could. Um, And it was like I had at that point I had about 150 tapes in my collection. So I started scanning cover art, and it was like it started as a checklist. Like it was just going to be so I could keep track of what I had, and then I wanted to share that. And from there, it was like, well, let's find out a little bit about these distributors and about what actually happened with the movie and how it got to this point.
And at what point were you interested in, like, for example, finding out the kind of like the history and the what was behind the colorized VHS tapes that were released?
The colorized VHS tapes were fascinating to me. I found those a little bit later, and you watch it and it's garbage. You know, it takes away the magic of the movie to be colorized, because you lose that first scare when Bill Heinzman doesn't look like a normal human being just walking up to Barbara in the cemetery. So it kind of gives away one of the best jumps in the movie. And you know, there were so many different colorized versions. Like they're all different. They're all low grade. I think Legend Films probably did the best one, but even then, it's like, why
It's
bother?
got some issues.
You know?
I mean, people don't realize, you know, so I was a Super 8 kid, I guess. You know, there was no VHS,
right?
You know, when I was a kid. You know, so I was a young teenager, probably 13. It was before high school. I got the Super 8 complete version of Night of the Living Dead, and that was the only way to see it complete at the time. Unless you had, you know, some cable stations were playing it. You know, not like not like a Cinemax, but I don't even know if there was a Cinemax at that point. But we really actually didn't have cable. It just wasn't in our area at the time. The early days of cable tended to go to where the homes were close together, and so you know we lived, you know, New Jersey, a more rural area, and you know it took a while for cable to get there. So, but you would see, you know, in other areas of New Jersey had local cable, and Night of the Living Dead would play, and it's like, wow, this is, you know, I wish I could see this. So it was Super 8, and then at one point, when VHS started hitting big, and you know it was everywhere, including like at the supermarket, or you know they had those, you know, with the other thing people don't realize is at the outset of VHS, it was like, you know, major movies were expensive. They were like rental price was, you know, $79.99 or up in that area, and then they might come down to like a sell through price at like $29.99, and so you know VHS was still out of, you know, if you were a kid, it was a little bit out of your range, and but we had like these clearance bins, or these, you know, these cheapo bins, and that's where Night of the Living Dead started showing up. And the colorized version was the one for a while. Was like the main one that you would see all over the place. So, you know, if you were already familiar with the film, as I was or as you were, it was like, what's this crap? You know, what's going on?
It was probably the widest distributed VHS at the time, because of the Hal Roach Studios were the ones that put it out, and they released it 2 or 3 different times on tape. And they did a black and white version too, but their claim to fame is the colorized version.
Right. And did they was that, it was Hal Roach Studios, but did it also go to like Good Times or something like that, or am I misremembering?
It did.
It
I
did
think
go to
they
Good
purchased
Times.
their library at one point, and they had the colorized version as well.
So
It was one of the budget labels.
Good Times was one of those, you know, they would sell, you know, they would sell the cheap tapes, you know, $9.99 or $7.99, but they, for a company selling cheap stuff, they had reach, so you would find it you know, just about anywhere. You know, supermarket checkout, things like that. They were, you know, or they just have bins and bins of this stuff. And Night of the Living Dead was, you know, you could find it in there. And unfortunately, it's the one that we were talking about. It wasn't a good quality one.
Yeah.
What in your estimation is the best VHS that was available?
The best is probably the versions that Anchor Bay put out later, because they actually took a little bit of care with
Yes.
the movies they put out.
Yeah.
I can tell the worst is probably the first one, actually. Like, people would be surprised, but the Meta VHS, from 1978, the colors are not the colors, but the grayscale on this is so blown out, you can barely see anything at all. And if anybody follows my Instagram, I posted some comparison pictures with that tape versus the Criterion Blu-ray, and it's absolutely insane just how poor the quality was. And they were charging $129 for that tape at the time, and it's almost completely blown out, like pure white. But yeah, as far as the best, it's definitely Anchor Bay.
Yeah, and you're talking about the so in terms of licensed VHS tapes, of course there was the first really licensed. Well, the Hal Roach, was colorized, was licensed after the fact. That's a whole other tale. But so the Laserdisc from Elite Entertainment would be the first actual restoration, and then first licensed, with Image 10 approval at the time, coming out, and that was restored off the negative. And from there, did a version of that go to VHS tape with Anchor Bay?
I'm not 100% sure it did. It would make sense because they did port a lot of Elite's catalog over there. So I can't say for certain that it was that particular restoration, but it does look better. So, because like they did the Millennium Edition DVD and everything, and that was still Elite, but they like I said, they ported like Evil Dead and things like that when they would release those as well. So I think they used the same masters, but again, I can't say for 100% certainty on that.
Yeah, there's they didn't go back to the negative, but there was something created at the time, because when we went through the materials for the MoMA restoration, or when the materials were brought to MoMA for them to store, prior to the restoration, there's all like in the negative, there's a sheet that's kind of like a log that's kept, with the negative, that says when it was taken out and when, and all of that was in there. So from the original prints, the original print negative that was made, once that was set to the Elite restoration that was done at WRS, which was the lab out in Pittsburgh at the time.
Yep.
All of that was written in there. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, so the first legitimate VHS app following the Laserdisc would have been around the time of the 30th anniversary. They put like a new version of the film.
Yeah, it was with a different soundtrack.
Yeah, there's the one with a different
Scott
soundtrack.
I think is his name.
Yeah,
that did the soundtrack for that. But yeah, they had released the movie, the original movie, and then the 30th anniversary pretty much at the same time. And I know they had worked off of I don't know if they worked off the negative, but I know they worked off of an inner positive, because I have some of the trims from that in my collection that someone rescued from WRS.
Right. So yeah, I think they made a fine grain, and then it was, the new stuff was edited into there, and then there was also some stuff that was edited out. Yeah. And
that stuff was going to end up in the trash, and now it's sitting on my shelf.
So the one that you're talking about, so there was two VHS put out at the same time.
Yep.
It was the the 30th anniversary with the additional scenes, and then it was
Mhm.
this other one, which was supposed to be restored Night of the Living Dead. And I went for that one
Yeah.
and popped it in and got the shock of my life that all of a
Yeah.
sudden the music is different. And it's
Yeah.
like, what's this crap? So
Yep.
yeah, that's I always get angry thinking about that one. But then soon
Mhm.
after the DVD hit, and there was before the Millennium, there was a version that had the painting of Karen Cooper,
Yep.
which was very green. That I believe was Anchor Bay. It was more of
They did
like a
that one
no
on
frills
Laserdisc
Anchor
also.
Bay. Yeah. And oh, so that also hit as Laserdisc from
Yep.
Anchor
Yeah,
Bay.
it was Laserdisc and the DVD with that painting, the sort of like
Yeah,
brownish background.
right. So that, and then the Millennium one came out, so that got us
Mhm.
into the those are the licensed releases. Tell us more about so your book, even though it's Night of the Living Tapes, it doesn't just cover VHS tapes. You really go into all of the um, distribution of the film, and
Mm.
you know, broadcast TV, and you know, basically every step of the way. Tell us a little bit about that.
So after the theatrical release, the film hit television syndication in 1972 on January 1st, and that was Bob Wilkins' Creature Features in San Francisco. And the way that the movies were shown on TV at that time, it was through a process called a film chain, where they would project a 16 millimeter film into a device that would translate that into a broadcast image. So there were all kinds of 16 millimeter prints struck from whatever source they had at the time. Um, I've read that it came from Walter Reed originally, like that they had licensed to Teleworld, and from there it just kind of spread. And then all of these prints were all around the country to be on TV, so that's how you got the television syndication. And then those 16 millimeter prints were reduced to 8 millimeter Super 8, and that's what you would find for sale in like the Blackhawk catalogs, or Duran if you're in the UK, Niles Film. I think it was Hollywood Film Exchange
Niles,
that did the bulk of the actual
yes.
processing, because like they kind of sub licensed to everybody else. But it was the
So
16 millimeter
they would
prints,
have been, yeah, they would have been working off of a 16 millimeter print
right, to reduce it to
to
the 8
make the
millimeter.
Super 8, right?
Yeah. And they did the same for VHS. That was telecine from 16 millimeter sources. And it was most likely Charles Band that did the first VHS, like with his company Media.
Media, right? Cool.
So like yeah, we covered
So
all through that, and then tapes from all around the world.
what got you interested in the whole, what led up to VHS? If VHS was was kind of like your area of interest, what got you to go back and find out all that stuff?
Um, I wanted to find out where all of the tapes came from, and it's like none of them were licensed, so it had to come from somewhere. So there had to be a story to get back to
Yeah.
where the film was shown theatrically and then shown on television. So there was a natural progression with it that happened with a lot of movies at the time. Like a lot of them would go theatrical, TV, and then a home release, but no movies would go 200 home releases. So it's a really interesting and sad story, ultimately, what happened to Image 10. But and a lot of people attribute the VHS to the success of the movie, saying like the public domain issue is why the movie's successful. I don't believe that at all. I think it's television syndication 100%.
Yeah,
That's where the
that's what
bulk
I've
of people
always
saw
said.
it. It played on
And
TV
as you
everywhere.
said, the television syndication was actually licensed.
Hmm.
So I mean, that came from Walter Reed through a package called Teleworld,
Yeah.
and it just depended on these packages of films would move around,
Hmm.
and so you would see you know the same movies on one channel were also playing in another area on a different channel. So it
Yep.
depends on who would get them. So the New York metropolitan area, New York City, New Jersey, parts of Pennsylvania, or the most far east of area of Pennsylvania. Channel 7, the major WABC affiliate, got Night of the Living Dead. It would show it, Saturday nights, always Saturday night. And I think it was probably maybe 2 years after, no more than 2 years after Bob Wilkins showed it. And that's out of New York is where the famous dramatization subtitle came in.
Yep.
That I'm not aware of that happening anywhere else, but I mean that's how I first saw it. Was that dramatization subtitle came on during the news scenes, the news broadcasts, because the story is that people freaked out, not because they thought it was real. I think they probably thought, what kind of crap are you playing, and called up and what do you think, this is funny, is this a joke? You put on what looks like a broadcast, so people were angry about it, and so that's why they started putting that on. So that's what the story is, but I wasn't old enough to find that out. So
the first time that the movie played on TV in Pittsburgh was in February '78 on Channel 53, and they had originally intended for it to be broadcast as a matinee, and there was a little bit of uproar about that. Some people wrote the newspapers and wrote the TV stations, and they ended up changing it to an 11 o'clock at night show instead the following week. So it was probably a good idea.
It's funny that it took a while for the word to hit Pittsburgh. We have Mick Ives is saying he has a question. So Mick, type your question in and we'll get to it. So what we did with just to give everybody a little background, when you came to Image 10 with the idea of the book, and like I said, we liked it a lot because we liked the idea of this, because instead of as you've said, majority of all this stuff was bootleg, but instead of ignoring this entire history of Night of the Living Dead, why not embrace it? And because it's moved forward and it's out of that, it's out of the kind of cesspool where everybody's just throwing everything out there. And a lot of that happened because of the MoMA restoration, or MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, taking it in, and basically elevating the film, and all of those things led to the film being elevated. So, why just discount this entire history of the film? It's important. And so we really like that idea that you had put it, you put it all in one place and made a lot of sense of it. And so my idea was that, well, you were going to self-publish this through Amazon, and I figured, just like anything else that goes on Amazon, it would maybe be there for, be popular for a couple weeks or a month or something, and then people lose track of it. So why not do like a Kickstarter? We could, bring in other manufacturers. And so we did a Kickstarter for the launch of Night of the Living tapes. And it's Image 10's only Kickstarter, but it was very successful. And we had not only your book, but the folks from Fright Rags did a T-shirt, and then also contributed the wearing the T-shirt. And I would stand up, but it's just going to blank out because of my background. But they also contributed the entire look of the whole thing. And this, we talked about that a great deal. We didn't really want something that was too slick or too, looks too much like the current horror magazines, or what you see in print. What if we went back to how it was done, kind of paced up back in the late 60s, early 70s, especially when Night of the Living Dead was in TV syndication. There was only so many photographs that you would see over and over again. What if we just like worked with that, and the designer, I believe it was Joe Allard over at Fright Rags, just rose to the occasion, made this great kind of, there you go, kind of like a Psycho inspired. If you know the movie poster of Psycho, it's in kind of like in pieces, and he just made this great, kind of Psycho inspired artwork. And then we just happened at that time to run into a company that was selling an unlicensed Night of the Living Dead VHS, and we said, "Hey, well, why don't you sell the licensed one?" So I think you have a copy there, right?
Yeah, this is the copy that Witter Entertainment and Broke Horror Fan put together for the Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah.
They did a big box VHS in a clamshell case.
Yeah. So there's all the great.
Sorry about all the glare.
Yeah, maybe just angle it a little. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there's all the great kind of like paste up artwork that was put together by Fright Rags for the specifically for the Kickstarter and for this release. And this is actually the Criterion, well, the MoMA restored, and the big box, the big silly VHS box that kicking back to the VHS era, you would go to video stores and they couldn't make the boxes big enough for some of these releases, and big and gaudy and silly looking, just to try to get the attention of people coming in to rent. So that was actually a bonus, which if the Kickstarter hit a certain milestone, number of sales, that would be added in, and we hit it. Well, the fans hit it, and the customers hit it, and so it's not only in the clamshell with all those silly stickers that used to be put on, VHS copies in video stores, like Be Kind, Rewind, and that kind of stuff, or just horror, so that I don't know, somebody would have to be told that Night of the Living Dead or like films were horror. They would put these stickers on it, and even though it was in the horror section, you were further informed that you were watching or going to rent a horror movie. But they did all those great little touches, and then the final was the big box, which all came together. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. Like I said, it was successful. We had I can't think of the company's name. They did trading cards. They did a lobby card trading card set. Trading cards that were based on the lobby card design. And then on the back, we had some information about the distribution of Night of the Living Dead. And Chris Stavrakis and Brian McGuire did the 1/1 scale corpse head, and did a special blood color version of that that they had put out. Like I said, all the stuff sold very, very well. The only stuff that didn't sell is the stuff that I haven't had the time to get on Image 10's website. So whatever we have left over, we will eventually get it up there. But like that VHS that you showed, that's still available, and we just have to get it up on the website, and people can be open to a whole bunch of other customers. So following up on your the release of this book, you then went to another area of Night of the Living Dead history, which is the advertising. And so tell us about that. That it's your book, A Theater Near You. That's about the advertising of Night of the Living Dead.
So when I was researching the first book, I came across all kinds of newspaper advertisements, and I just started collecting them. It was various sources like library, microfilm, digital archives, and there were just hundreds and hundreds of advertisements from all over the country, and they were really interesting ads that were ran, and some of them were the official advertising campaign. And then a few years after that, they started to get kind of like cut and pasted together, and it would just be these really, interesting little things that you could tell that the local theaters were putting together with the materials that they had from the original releases, because they just never let go of the film prints. There were some drive-ins around the country that just kept the film prints, and they would run it 6, 7 times a year. And I collected something like 1,100 ads and decided to put those together in a gallery, and that was a theater near you. The book also kind of traces back to how a movie like Night of the Living Dead was able to be made, in a time when the production code had kind of fallen apart and the MPAA system wasn't in place at that point. It didn't actually become effective until November 1968. So they kind of just slid in underneath having to get the movie rated in order to advertise and things like that. I don't know. It was just like a really, really interesting story, and the ad materials are great. I mean,
so it's a similar situation to what we were saying about the Night of the Living Dead plays in theaters.
Mhm.
Then it finds this new audience, which would certainly include myself, on television syndication, on broadcast TV. There was no cable at that time, or if there was, it was very sparse cable. Certainly the early 70s was broadcast television, and these syndication packages of films would go out to whichever stations and their affiliates that bought them. So for example, to me, like the easiest way to understand that was like Planet of the Apes. There was this series of Planet of the Apes films from 1968 through, I guess, 1972 or 3.
Mhm.
Was maybe the last one. It was 5 movies. And that quickly went to television, because that was a big deal then. There was no sell-through on VHS, no streaming, of course. And but so back to Night of the Living Dead, that's how Night of the Living Dead found its audience. But that was legit. That was the distributor, Walter Reed. Even though they weren't paying Image 10, they weren't paying the filmmakers, or not paying them enough, or cooking the books, or whatever they were doing. It still was, they were the legit distributor, and they did put the film into television syndication legitimately. And so that's where the first batch of, from the original cinema release until TV syndication, that's where the original advertising materials were used.
Mhm.
But then you're saying, as time went on,
those
people started doing their own thing. So,
Mhm. You can tell, you can see pieces that were obviously cut out from different advertisements, and unrelated movies entirely would be pieced together to create a Night of the Living Dead ad that just sometimes made no sense at all. But
I like
interestingly enough, Walter Reed actually owned the Waverly Theater in New York, which was where Night of the Living Dead did 25 weeks in a row in 1971, and then came back for 55 more weeks after that. So they were kind of hawking their own goods in their own theaters. And Waverly is also famous for being the Rocky Horror Picture Show midnight screening theater.
And so Rocky Horror would have been, what was the year on that? That was more like 76, 77?
I think it's 76. I'm not 100% though.
So, but Night of the Living Dead wasn't the first midnight movie. So they were...
No, it wasn't the first.
But so they
earlier than that was like Alejandro Jodorowsky's El Topo.
El Topo. So that's interesting. I never made that connection until you just said it now. So Walter Reed, which was the parent company of Continental, which was the distribution arm, the distribution arm of Walter Reed that released Night of the Living Dead. They basically took that model of the midnight movie
Yep.
and stuck Night of the Living Dead, one of their, titles that they kind of just let languish and not really. There was really never a big wide release, no matter how popular the movie was. They never really followed up with a like a huge
No,
release.
it was always
Yeah.
a double bill or a triple bill with something
Right.
else, like Doctor Who and the Daleks and Ghidra at first, and then Slaves for the second run.
So, which was that mishandling was what caused the outrage because of the famous Roger Ebert um, Roger Ebert article, which isn't really reviewing the film or saying that the film is bad. It's saying that what is wrong with these guys that would put this movie in a kid's matinee, so that if the kids were watching something like Ghidra the Three-Headed Monster or Doctor Who and the Daleks or something like that, it's kind of it was probably Doctor Who, because that was a successful double bill that that was kind of bandied about Variety magazine or Box Office or whatever about how much money it made. So
and it was definitely the matinee.
It was geared towards matinees.
They knew how to advertise to children, but they were advertising the wrong movie.
Right, and so this, all of a sudden you're sitting kids in front of Night of the Living Dead, and they're unsuspecting what they're, like. Now, it wouldn't have mattered to me because I was a weird kid. I loved all this stuff, but from
me too.
7 or 8 years old, is when I watched Night of the Living Dead, it scarred me for life, but I feel in a good way, not in a bad way. But I never had any notion that this wasn't 100% fake. It was just a lot of fun. So that's just a very interesting. This would have all been before the thing that you're talking about, like the advertising, where it kind of just started rolling of its own volition, and theaters, independent theaters that kept the prints and never returned them or came into them later or whatever, and would just play it all the time. That's around the time the advertising started to focus on the notoriety of the film.
Right.
It really wasn't like that to start with, correct? It was
No,
later.
It really wasn't. They did have like the whole insurance policy thing gimmick right at the beginning, but the notoriety is what, like you said, the later advertising would feed off of more than anything. Like, you see the gorier images in the pictures and stuff, and frightened images of Marilyn, and they would outright vampires from other movies.
Right, they would outright lie and say, banned in so many countries and things like that. So, people, what am I going to see? So
there are dozens of them that advertise the movie as being in color too, which is hilarious.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I gotta look at the book a little more. Mick Ives did post his question, but this is more a question for the filmmakers than it is for us. But actually, from knowing Russ and Gary and John Russo, Kyra, Judy O'Day, I can answer that nobody working on the film, they weren't scared by anything that was happening, because they all knew each other. It's not like as Kyra has said, I saw everybody before they were in character. So there was nothing to be, there was nothing inherently frightening about the scenes that she shot or that anybody shot. But that would be a good question to ask when we have some of the actual filmmakers. I had nothing to do with the making of Night of the Living Dead, so I'm not gonna answer that. Yes, I have seen that documentary, Midnight
Mhm.
Movies, and the bonus disc is a very bad copy of Night. So, so there you go. Is that a copy that you have, or you're not so much
I
into the DVDs?
I collect the DVDs. I don't believe I have that copy. I have the documentary, but it's what came out over here was like a single disc version. There was
Right,
nothing special with it.
right. So yeah, if anybody else has any other questions, please ask them, and we will try to get to them here. Um, so uh, in doing these two books, do you have is there like any other area of Night of the Living Dead that like a specific area, like how these two books are written, that you want to like eventually get into?
I'm not really sure. After writing the two, I was a little burned out. But I mean, the movie is just it's fascinating, and there's a wealth of information out there if you're willing to look for it. It's scattered, so like that's the task to overcome, is to try to figure out what the best thing to look for. I mean, I'm still interested in the DVD aspect that I didn't touch on in Night of the Living Tapes, because there's so many of those, so many more than there were tapes. But I mean, that could be its own book. It could be an
Right.
addendum, you know.
And why do you
Just
think there
like,
was more DVD? I mean, is it just because the media is just so much easier to duplicate?
yeah, the replication is quicker, and they can
Yeah,
do 10 or 12 copies of it on one unit instead of on like a tower of decks that they would
right,
have had to use to do. So like the amount of space that it takes to run a DVD manufacturing facility has to be significantly less than it did for VHS.
right. Yeah,
And
there
it's
was
like the
just so
media is
much.
so cheap.
Yeah, there was so much more infrastructure, and is that also like in VHS? There was so much more involved in order to make the copies. So, in your opinion, is that what is would that be why a lot of it tapered off in the Blu-ray era? Because that's not as easy to author, and I mean, besides
Yeah,
that,
like
there now is my theory has always been, if you put out a good version,
mhm,
that's what people are going to buy, and that seems to
yeah,
and it also seems to be Criterion's,
mhm,
the way that
yeah,
they
that's
operate. But um, at the same time, I think some of it maybe has to do with, again, Blu-ray's a little more difficult,
mhm,
and you're not going to just take you may have been able to get away with a less than stellar looking copy on
right.
DVD, but you get to Blu-ray,
There's a certain
and now
expectation.
there's an expectation there that it's got to look a lot cleaner. So
Mhm.
um, so that's good. They're chalk one up for technology, that it kind
Yeah,
of helped
yeah.
clear the field for Night of the Living Dead. So as far as Night of the Living Dead's concerned, um, John Vulo is asking, what's your favorite box art?
I can show it to you actually. My favorite one, it's kind of funny. It's a Spanish VHS. And the reason I like this one so much is that the artwork has nothing whatsoever to do with Night of the Living Dead. Oh, sorry.
I kind of
But
go,
it's from
that.
the Amicus movie, The Vault of Horror.
Yes. I recognize that right away because of the hairstyle of the guy on
Yeah.
the right.
But then, like, the back is, Barbara.
And when did this one come out?
This one was, let me see if it has a date on it. They don't all have dates.
I mean, approximately.
Yeah, I'd
Clamshell
say the
VHS.
mid 80s probably. But yeah,
How
that's my
many?
favorite box art. So
How many? Like, what's the ratio in your book of domestic, U.S. domestic to foreign releases in
um,
Night of the Living Tapes?
I'd have to say probably it's probably pretty close to 50-50, maybe 60-40. There are a lot of international tapes. I find more international ones than I do domestic tapes. Uh, it seems like there's at least 5 or 6 in every country that had a VHS market.
Right.
I find like interesting ones all the time. Like one of the ones that I just picked up recently is this a South Korean tape. Sorry.
Wow.
This one has zombies from the 1990 version on the cover, but it is the original movie. Like you see on the back, there's like actual artwork from the original. And I do have multi-zone players, so I can play the tapes to verify what's on them and stuff. So like it's just kind of cool to see. But yeah, this they released Night 90 on VHS from the same company as well, but yeah, this was the original one. It just has the Night 90 artwork.
That photo almost looks like Jason Miller from Exorcist 3.
Yeah.
Is that 2 eyes? So
yeah, it's 2 eyes above the 3 ghouls.
Yeah, I get it. Okay, so real interesting. It brings up an interesting aspect. I'd like to, or the next logical step in this, and like these releases, is how many had soundtracks made. We've always talked about that because there was no the one good thing, if there is a silver lining in the whole Walter Reed Continental mishandling and subsequent lawsuit from Image 10, of the film, their mishandling of the film was that there really was never any direct deals from Image 10 made with foreign entities. So in recent times, as we've kind of hopscotched Night of the Living Dead first to the Museum of Modern Art, to this restoration, then to its definitive home video release, which is still ongoing. We've then, moved it. Criterion Janus Films territory is really North America and the UK and Ireland. And they don't really handle anywhere else, but they have those connections worldwide. So we had asked them to help us to get it out there. So now Night of the Living Dead, which they went against their own norms and did help to release it in other countries. So now Night of the Living Dead has legitimate releases in Japan, which it never had before, in Germany, Italy, France, and so forth. There's still a few countries, that it isn't the Criterion version, or the MoMA version is not there yet. But in all of that, the question has come up several times, like, well, what materials are available for like the German dubbing? It's like, well, there aren't any, because Image 10 was not working with the original, like if it was Constantine Films, or in the UK it was, Monarch. Well, that would have been the same soundtrack. But just in terms of like any materials that were used, Image 10 was not working through Walter Reed Continental to these other distributors worldwide. So nobody really has any clue, what was done, where any of that stuff is. Some of it would probably be pretty valuable because it could potentially have for example, like an M&E track, which we don't have the full materials to generate at this point. So
a lot of the VHS tapes from the international tapes, a lot of them were subtitled. Like they didn't really go to any extra effort. Some of them have no subtitles at all, and they're just in English.
So maybe in those cases, it's similar to once it got out of the regular distribution in those countries, just like how it did here,
Mhm.
and then it went into the hands of less reputable people.
Yeah,
They just
they
put
took
out,
the path of least
they put out
resistance.
whatever. Yeah. Cool. So John Scolari's asking, what's your next night book?
Don't currently have the next night book. I'm sorry to disappoint, but and if I'm going to do anything, it's probably going to be the DVD book.
Right. And do you have the UK Palace video or the Intervision?
I do actually. I have both. I have I have one Palace video. I know there's one that I've never been able to find. It's got crazy like colored artwork on it, but I have the Intervision VHS, and I also have the Intervision Video 2000, which I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with what a Video 2000 is. It's kind of like a cross between a VHS and a cassette tape. So they look like this. And that was popular in Europe for a very brief time. But this is a pretty rare tape to come across. I've only ever seen the one.
And so that format would only ever be available in PAL.
Yeah.
PAL format, because
Yeah.
it was only a European. And John Vulo's asking, is there one VHS copy that's more valuable or rather than the others?
There's a couple. The Mita original VHS tape that has Judy Ridley's face on the cover of it is probably the one that is priced the highest if you look for it on the resale market. I've seen that upwards of $1,000 for about the last year or two.
Wow.
I don't know if they're actually selling for that price. I mean, I think I paid $50 for mine. So. But there's some double feature sets that go for quite a bit, and every now and then you'll see like a really random copy come up, and they'll be priced $200-$300. You know, whether or not anybody buys them. You know, sometimes they sit, sometimes they go right away. It just depends on whether or not they've been seen before.
So would that also answer what's one of the rarest ones? It would be that original media tape.
The original Mita is one of the harder ones to come by, especially in a decent quality case. Usually, because those were 4-flap cases, so they had all 4 sides were enclosed. Usually, they're missing the bottom, or they're missing the top, or they're missing both. Right. It just depends on how the video stores treated the tapes, because they were most likely X rentals. Most people didn't spend $130 on a tape at the time.
And so, explain that to everybody. There's between Mita and Media. It's the same company, but
yeah, it's the same company.
Charles Band's The Full Moon.
Mita was Media Home Entertainment Distribution Association is what it stood for. And it was also coincidentally his ex-wife's name. There was confusion in the marketplace. People thought it was just misspelled, so they eventually just switched to Media. And the later releases of the movie had Media stamped on it instead of Mita. And at that time, they changed the artwork too. And they used one of the original lobby cards for the cover of that tape. And then it would go on later to be re-released again with the kind of gaudy purple artwork and a painted box cover. So they released the movie several times, and then their sub-distributors released it as well. So it just kind of went in a progression down the line of different companies that were part of the same company putting the movie out. But yeah, the Mita tape is probably the rarest.
And that's the one that has Judy Ridley on the cover, the truck, that posed truck shot.
And that's just because it's widely believed to be the first.
Right. So from your perspective, why, okay, obviously no other movie has this kind of area of collectability like you've jumped into. No. Or kind of happened into, by first getting one VHS tape, but then seeing, hey, why are there all these versions out there? But at the end of the day, if Night of the Living Dead was not a good movie, That's why I never go with the, with the, as you mentioned, the public domain argument, which you don't agree with
Yeah.
either. If it was, there's other public domain movies and other public domain horror movies. I mean, if it wasn't a good movie, nobody would be interested. You wouldn't be able to pay people to watch it. So for
movies like Dementia 13 had a very similar distribution approach. Like, it was released theatrical, it was released through syndication, slipped into the public domain. Yeah, it had, maybe a dozen, 2 dozen releases on home video, but nothing like Night of the Living Dead, because it's not the same caliber of movie. I mean, it's a good movie, but it's no Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, well, you could. There's any number of Roger Corman movies that basically had the same. They were on, horror movies or monster movies that when he made them, small independent producer, but he just knew how to make money. He knew how to work the connections that he had. So something like Little Shop of Horrors, I mean, that's not going to be like this, that's Little Shop of Horrors is like almost like a satire. But it's not going to be the same. It's not going to have the same impact, of course. And it did go on to, become a big budget Little Shop of Horrors, which was based on a stage play. So people did think enough of that, but it wasn't because it was public domain that happened as well. So he had any number of other, Attack of the Crab Monsters. He would make these movies. He would mostly use sets that were standing because his brother was a film producer. So if there was they had 3 days to utilize a movie set. He's just a very good planner and knew how to make use of those resources, just like George and company knew how to make use of the resources that they had. And he, at the end of that, cycle, it was, make the movie, make it for this much. It will play in theaters for this long. It'll make this profit, and then we're done. And in a lot of cases, he just didn't send a print to the copyright office because that print could be making money for him. So, and then that's why the movie fell into public domain or became whatever, it was. And, but so, and they had the same thing. They had this kind of second life or living dead life on television syndication, movies that were made to just be on double bills or whatever, whatever the situation called for. Roger Corman could, and the people that worked with him could, get something viable in there to make money, and then they would move on to the next thing, and then all of this, this output found another life on television syndication. And in a lot of cases, these movies were public domain, but at the same time, they just didn't have the longevity of Night of the Living Dead. So, keeping all that in mind, just the unique situation of there being so many VHS tapes, and that led to you an area of the film that you wanted to collect. What is it about the film itself that motivated you or had the impact that would make you want to collect all these VHS versions and be able to tell the history of it?
It's one of the first movies that really scared me. I'd never seen anything like it, and I'd watched horror movies from basically birth. There was just something just incredibly realistic, and just the kind of guerrilla way that the movie's shot makes you feel like it's really happening to these people. And it was just absolutely terrifying to me. And then to find out that it was, made by a bunch of people that had never made a movie before, and they did it relatively close to where I live, like 4 hours away from me. And I mean, it made me want to be a filmmaker. I tried my hand at film school for a couple of years, mostly because of George Romero and Night of the Living Dead. And ultimately found out that they weren't really respected in the schools, but times were a little bit different then. This was back in the early 2000s. Like I was basically told that there was no way I would ever be successful making horror movies. So kind of demotivated me from that, but it never took away the passion that I had for movies in general and wanting to tell stories. And that was kind of the genesis for wanting to write a book was, I still wanted to be able to tell stories. And this is just such a fascinating story to me.
Not just the film itself, but the story.
Yeah,
of
the
how
making
it all
of
came
and
together.
everything that went into the movie. Like that stuff really interests me. Like I'm a big documentary film person. I love behind the scenes stuff. I like to know how the movies are made. Like, I like to see the magic trick from behind the curtain.
Right. What were, prior to Night of the Living Dead, like if you were a horror movie fan, what were some of the things, that interested you? Like what were some of the other films or
I
other
was the kind of
directors?
kid that would watch Nightmare on Elm Street and make a Freddy Krueger glove out of pop cans and popsicle sticks and stuff like that. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, so it was slasher movies more than anything. And then, like I said, it was just the like blunt realism of Night of the Living Dead was different from everything that I had watched up to that point. Like the only movie that had really scared me before that was Evil Dead, and it was just because I was a small child when I saw that movie too. And like, as an adult, I love the movie, and it's got a very similar like making of aspect. It was a bunch of guys from Michigan that drove to Tennessee to make a movie, and it was just another one that was really close to home for me.
But so like you would say like you were affected, and you kind of the whole 80s thing, that led to like Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th, that just like spoke to you as a young horror movie fan.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see did you approach any of those movies like it was almost like a challenge to watch them, or what are they gonna throw at us this time? I remember
Not until I was quite a bit older, and then I started to discover like the Italian movies and things like Argento, Fulci, and stuff like that. Then they kind of became an endurance test when you sit down and say, "Hey, can I watch Cannibal Holocaust all the way through?" or something like that.
Yeah.
But
Well,
mostly it was just, those were the movies that were playing in the theaters, and those were the movies that were in the video stores to rent. And I grew up with some older cousins that, that was what we did. We rented movies on the weekend, and we would go to see movies when they came out.
So the whole video, just that whole video horror movie video atmosphere at the time.
Yeah. And it's the box art. I always felt like it just kind of called to me, whether it was honest box art or not,
Yeah. Well, just like movie, that's just another form of like how movie posters in the 50s and 60s would, how they just needed a good artist, and they could do something that would draw people in.
Yeah,
and
it kind of lets your imagination run away with you.
Yeah, and did the film actually deliver on any of that or not? What is do you have a next book, or a book, not Night of the Living Dead, but a next book
I just finished a book a few months ago called Welcome to Primetime. This is about the Freddy's Nightmares TV show. And I co-wrote that with a couple of guys who did a podcast of the same name. And this is just kind of a unauthorized look at the TV show and interviews with creators and things like that they covered on their podcast. And it's just like a companion piece to that. And right now I'm researching a new book that's about European nunsploitation movies, because it's another genre that just absolutely fascinates me.
The so about Freddy's Nightmares, that's pretty interesting, and they can get this book at
Yeah, it's available
your
at Death
website.
Row Press and on Amazon.
Yeah. So all of your books are available from you, but then also from Amazon if people want to get it there. Okay. Um, talk a little bit about Freddy's Nightmares. So that was an interesting period. So you would have seen that as a kid then.
Yeah,
would have
I
been
saw
like
that
your
when it aired on syndication
prime time
as well.
Yeah.
So it was a weird show. Like if you went into that expecting Nightmare on Elm Street, you got something totally different. It's just bizarre. Like Freddy's barely in it, but when he's in it, it's usually just to give like a quick little quip or one line about what's happening in the story. And there's not a lot of information about the show because nobody really likes to talk about it. It was kind of a negative experience for a lot of the people that were involved with it. But my co-authors were able to interview several of the creators. Like one of the creators, Geoff Freilich, had actually never done an interview before. So it was the first time he'd ever talked to anybody about his career or anything. He just assumed no one cared, like a lot of these people do.
And was it the same? Was it the same basic idea of like how the Friday the 13th series, was spawned out of the movies, but it was of course totally different.
Yeah.
The
It was
kind
just
of like take on it.
It was a Bob Shea cash in to try to make more money off of the franchise. And they just they shot it in essentially an old porn warehouse.
So yeah, that what people don't understand about that era, and it's also very interesting. So, and a lot of it is also because of George and Company. So George and Richard Rubenstein and Laurel. So
Tales from the Dark Side.
Yeah, most people know they started a series, Tales from the Dark Side, and that was syndication as well. So what that means is, whereas TV shows will be produced for like for one of the network channels or something along those lines. These guys were producing independently, and then it was sold into syndication, which means it would come on TV on different channels depending on where you lived, and depending on the territory, and at different times. So there was no one set time to see any of this stuff. And at one point, I would say around like the late 80s, all of a sudden there was a bunch of stuff, including Freddy's Nightmares. As Freddy's Nightmare was originally prime time, but then it went to, did it go to like midnights or something, like late nights?
Yeah, I mean it was a syndication show, so it aired like whenever they decided to air it. But mostly it was like 11 o'clock at night that it would air, or 11:30 after the news, something like that.
Yeah, so there was a similar situation with a bunch of other shows, including Monsters, which was the follow-up to Tales from the Dark Side. It would show, it was in syndication, it would show at night, like late night, and as well as the Friday the 13th series, which I distinctly remember being prime time, but then disappearing and then going to late at night. So all of a sudden, all these things were late at night. And then at some point, the plug was just pulled from all of it. They were in their, like the tail end of all of them. And then they just disappeared. And that was supposedly had to do with the Christian right didn't like any of this stuff on TV and just and I guess got rid of all of it, pulled some influence or whatever, political influence, and got rid of it all. But
a lot of the
was
guys
really interesting. I'm sorry.
A lot of the guys that worked on Freddy's Nightmares, like Gil Adler, eventually went on to rescue Tales from the Crypt. That show was going down the tank very rapidly after the second season, and they came on board and were able to keep it alive for I think 7 seasons. And that was pretty much the last like really big anthology horror show
Right.
like this.
But that that was
And that was
HBO. So
HBO at the
yeah, so that
time.
was a whole different thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, prior to the made for cable, where which I guess was led by Tales from the Crypt or like The Sopranos,
Mm-hmm.
or something like what was the one where the comedy where the guy would watch TV as a kid and it would what was that, Dream On, something
Dream
like
On, I think.
Dream On, yeah. It was basically like a situation, sitcom, but it was a little bit more racy and they could
Mm-hmm.
get away with a lot more because it was HBO. I just remember that
Right.
being like really oh, this is different. They're obviously not being uh, told to live up to certain standards or show certain things. But what I really liked about that era was the Friday the 13th series. The last
Mm-hmm.
season was really, really good.
It
It
was,
seemed
yeah.
like the gloves were off and they were just able to do whatever. I mean, they had a knockout episode where they were hunting a demon and where they come across these demon hunters. I just remember it being really, really cool. And they had another really good episode where the premise of the series was they were trying to get back all these cursed objects, and the object in that particular one was a car that would go back into back into the past, and they took it back into the South during the height of the KKK. It was just the commentary in the episodes and what they were
Mm-hmm.
doing at the time was really, really good. There was another great one with a wheelchair and a sexual abuse survivor being in the wheelchair and then her being able to use it for revenge. Um,
Yeah, they
and
were able to find ways to tackle pretty tough subjects
yeah, they,
in shows that you wouldn't expect.
well, that was, and that's the thing that have always talked about with Night of the Living Dead. Prior to Night of the Living Dead, um, horror and sci-fi movies, especially, but some TV, like The Twilight Zone, were used to tackle tough subjects that you couldn't normally talk about,
Yep.
or you couldn't, make a very direct, screenplay, photoplay, whatever you want to call it, program about this particular subject. So they would get away with it by, putting a supernatural element to it,
Mm-hmm.
or, like in terms of something like the first Godzilla, it's the
Right.
Japanese reaction to the bomb and to the atomic bomb, and it actually creates this even worse, um, this worse problem that is then combated by the creation of even an even worse weapon. So they have a lot that they're saying right there, and you could get away with that in horror and science fiction. And so it was, but by the 80s, as we know in movies, they were just doing whatever.
Yeah.
You didn't have to hide it anymore. You could basically say it, right out. So
Mm-hmm.
it was just really interesting to be seeing that, it going back to that, where it was putting some kind of interesting commentary in there, whether, whatever the taboo subject, they were able to get it in. And then all of a sudden just have that disappear was crazy. And, we never really got it back. I mean,
No.
something like uh, in terms of George Romero, a movie like Creepshow is, it everybody loves it. It's a great movie, but
Yeah.
it's one of the only ones where it doesn't really have his brand of kind of like social commentary, in there. So that's what I always liked. I was never a zombie movie fan. I was a George Romero movie fan, and
Right.
I just liked the things that he would, if you were open to it, the
Mm-hmm.
things that he would say. Once I got past um, Night of the Living Dead was the first one I saw, obviously. And once I got past the kind of like disappointment that Dawn of the Dead was not the exact same thing, was not carrying the torch further. But that was my misreading of it. But once I got past that and then realized all that's in Dawn of the Dead, I
Yeah.
wanted that from all of his films. And then I was, open to, well, there's got to be some other directors making movies like that,
Yeah.
and it was kind of really hard to find at the time. So, it was a lot of, I always give the Friday the 13th series a hard time, or not the TV series, the films a hard time, because it was, I saw the very first one, and it wasn't, earth shattering, but that was one of those movies where it was kind of like an endurance test. You knew that people were going to die horribly, and
Yeah.
could you sit through it all and everything. So it was that was a but it wasn't like something like a Cannibal Holocaust, which was absolutely ridiculous. So
Yeah.
my thing was like, yeah, this was fun. I think it was fun for a lot of people, and but I saw that at a young age. And so by the time the second movie came out, the Friday the 13th Part 2, then like kind of my grade, the kids that I went to school with kind of caught up, and now they're able to go see movies like that. And they're all saying how great this is. And then I finally saw it. I said, this sucks. This is the same movie again, And it was obvious, there was a pattern going on. The producers got their hands on these things, like you said, and they were just trying to, how much can we wring out of the cloth? And they knew, because of people like George and trying to think who else. I guess early Lloyd Kaufman, something like Mother's Day was unrated, and was pretty strong stuff for the guys, who eventually would be Trauma. I think the Friday the 13th producer and the Freddy, the Nightmare on Elm Street producer, they didn't want to get in the same boat as George Romero and have this movie that was going to get an X rating or have to go out unrated and then lose profit. So they started watering down and just repeating the cycle every so often. And I don't know. To me, the movies were kind of like laughed at when they came out. It's like it's one of these again. So there wasn't really edgy stuff. That it's like made out to be now. I mean, there was really nothing edgy about it. So
no, it was mostly just trying to one up each other with special effects and appeal to the kids, the Fangoria kids.
I mean, not all of them had a Robert Englund, a good actor who could really embody that, and we had seen Robert Englund in a lot of other things, and then he just kind of like, if you were a kid at the time, he was in like the V TV series, and a lot of like low budget, penitentiary, kind of like these low budget, not really erotic, but kind of like skin flicks that you're lucky enough you could rent it or something like, or catch it on cable. And then all of a sudden he's this major monster character or whatever. So but not all of them had something like that. And it was obvious that they were just trying to like get as much play as they could out of the wring the cloth for every nickel you could get out of it. So that's why it was refreshing when something, like I said, like that Friday the 13th series came on, and it started tackling some really cool subject matter, and it had some impact, and you also weren't really expecting it, because I don't know, it didn't seem like there was a lot out of the 90s, that you could really point to and say, yeah, that was really awesome. So, George wasn't making too many movies back then, so
nope.
But cool. If let me just see if anybody else has any other questions, and then we will wrap up. So no, I don't even know if we got anybody still watching us ramble, but but so anyway, thanks for being on, Geoff. This was great.
Thank you.
We
I
don't
appreciate it.
Yeah, we don't get nearly enough chance to talk, so I'm glad we got to talk tonight about
me
this
too.
stuff. But again, you can get Geoff's all of Geoff's books are available here at Doubt the Cult Press, and you also have some other Night of the Living Dead items, including like tell everybody a little bit about those, like a 45 and some other.
The vinyl record's actually sold out right now. Just sold the last copy of that a few months ago. So that one it was limited to 50, and it was for the Kickstarter that we did for a theater near you. So that one's, it's out of print. We're probably not going to print any more of that unless something changes in the future. But I do still have some trading cards left from that. Those were like vintage newspaper ads. I picked some of my favorite ads and had them manufactured into trading cards. And I think I've got some like reprint advertising materials and like the reprint of the premiere invitation, stuff like that. It's still available on there. But yeah, most of the Kickstarter stuff is gone now. So sorry.
Well, like I said, we still have T-shirts. There's still well, not a lot. We have a few. Those I believe are on image10.com in the store, and we still have we still have some VHS. It's just a matter of me getting them up there. But that was a lot of fun to do that project, and hopefully we'll do more in the future.
Definitely.
Let's think of another one, and hopefully come back again. If you think of any topics you want to talk about, that are that are related to VHS or home video, I'd really like to just throw this idea out there. But I'd really like to talk about or do a Nightcast about that Elite Laserdisc, because there was so much on there. And I recently pulled out my Laserdisc player again. It would be really cool to be on here and to kind of like maybe have like a video prepared where we could cycle through what was all involved with that, because that was also a fun time.
You have to get a hold of Don May. I'm sure he would be thrilled to do it.
Yeah, that would be cool. That was the first real restoration of the film. So it was like seeing a whole new film. And the first time that there were audio commentaries for the film, really the first and only time George did an audio commentary with some of the others. So that was like having a whole documentary in itself, in addition to this great new version of the film. And then there was all the extra material, and it came in a great gatefold, which was like buying like an LP record, because that's what you would, if you were into rock bands or whatever, or even like movie soundtracks, that's how they came back then. They were usually 2 record sets, and you got this great gatefold artwork, and that was almost as enjoyable as the what the content was itself. So let's think about doing that in the future. If we can't get Don May, it'll just be us talking about it. All right, well, thanks everybody for watching, and
thank you.
We'll see you all again next time. And you know what, I'm not even going to bother with the with the sign off. So the thing that the producer usually runs. So we'll just end the stream. So take care. See you next time.
See you.